Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're hitting the road for a cinematic trip straight across the country to uncover real, everyday American towns that literally feel like you've stepped right back into the mid-20th century. Now, to be clear, we aren't looking for manufactured theme parks here, and we're definitely not hunting for staged movie sets. We are tracking down everyday places where the classic, authentic charm of the 1950s has just naturally survived the test of time. Imagine pulling off a chaotic, busy interstate and instantly finding yourself in a completely different era, a place where the pace is just wonderfully slow and the neon signs still buzz. Well, let's hit the road and explore these fascinating living time capsules. Think about driving through America today. It's an environment almost entirely built on speed and constant connection, right? Modern highways stretch on for miles, completely bypassing smaller communities. Massive, identical shopping centers seem to cover the outskirts of literally every city. And let's be honest, almost everyone you walk past has their head tilted down, bathed in the glow of a smartphone. It's a landscape of nonstop, fast-paced visual noise. But then, you take an unexpected exit. You turn onto a quiet two-lane road, and the transition is jarring in the absolute best way possible. Suddenly, a classic chrome diner appears beside the road, and you can practically smell the strong coffee and griddled burgers. An authentic, buzzing neon sign glows right above a small-town street lined with vintage independent storefronts. And the craziest part? This isn't a museum. These are real, living American communities where pieces of an older, much quieter America are still very much alive and functioning right this very second. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Pacing and Escaping, Leaving the Modern World Behind. So, to really grasp this sense of escape, we're heading to our first two stops, Mackinac Island out in Michigan and Colonial Williamsburg down in Virginia. Up on Mackinac Island, which sits out in the striking blue waters of Lake Huron, cars are completely banned. They are simply absent from everyday life. Arriving there is a literal physical shock to the system. You step off the ferry and suddenly realize, wait, there are no engine sounds, there are no exhaust fumes, no honking horns. You just hear the clop of horse hooves, the ringing of bicycle bells, and the rustle of the wind. It's wild. And while Williamsburg preserves America's colonial period, so not exactly the 1950s, mid-century America actually had a massive, obsessive fascination with preserving this exact kind of earlier history. Walking through those historic streets today gives you an older version of the country with absolutely zero modern visual noise. It is a complete sensory reset. Just imagine arriving somewhere where you aren't surrounded by traffic, where the streets are genuinely quiet. I mean, that kind of profound sensory relief completely changes your mindset. It forces you to just decompress. When the environment actually encourages you to slow down, look up, and breathe, you start to understand exactly how different American travel once felt. Long before the era of high-speed interstates and endless drive-through convenience, the journey was meant to be taken at a human pace, a pace where you actually noticed the towns you were passing through. Moving right along to Section 2, Preserving America's Past, History Living Next Door. Okay, so over in Greenfield Village, Michigan, it's like the modern world literally just stops at the dates. You won't find giant shopping malls or towering skyscrapers looming over you here. Instead, you can walk down a single, quiet dirt road and see historic workshops, classic mercantile stores, and old homes pulled from completely different periods of American life, all just standing side by side. Down in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, you find a truly fascinating juxtaposition. It is a wild study in contrasts. You could easily spend an afternoon completely surrounded by flashy modern tourist attractions, bright lights, and loud entertainment. And then, mere minutes later, you're driving up a winding, quiet mountain road into the Great Smoky Mountains. Suddenly, you're finding traditional Appalachian cabins and old-fashioned craft workshops. It's proof that the past doesn't always have to disappear to make way for the future. Sometimes it just sits comfortably right next to the modern world, waiting for you to step across the threshold. Take St. Charles, Missouri, for example, located right along the banks of the Missouri River. Walking through its historic district offers this incredibly seamless continuity between America's past and present. Because of its beautifully preserved brick buildings and narrow tree-canopied streets, which were designed long before modern suburban sprawl even existed, you are literally forced to explore at a walking pace. You browse small, family-owned local shops on foot, popping in and out of traditional storefronts that have served generations of people. It's a thriving, living American town that still proudly carries visible, everyday pieces of its history. It blends that 1950s Main Street charm with modern community life in a way that just feels incredibly natural. Which brings us to Section 3, Classic Small Town Charm, the Heart of the Community. The contrast between places like Bisbee, Arizona and Huntington, Indiana perfectly highlights just how diverse mid-century charm can actually be. Bisbee began as a booming copper mining town, and today, walking through its historic downtown feels exactly like you've wandered onto a rugged Western film set. Its incredibly narrow streets and colorful mismatched architecture are built directly into the side of a steep, dramatic desert landscape. It is wildly unique. But on the complete flip side, you have Huntington, Indiana, which basically evokes the feeling of a classic Norman Rockwell painting come to life. It perfectly captures that quintessential image of Midwestern small-town America. Older, well-kept homes with wide front porches, local businesses that have been there for decades, and a much slower pace of life where the downtown square is simply the undisputed core of the community.
Look, these aren't just cute architectural novelties to look at. They represent a fundamental shift in how Americans interacted with each other. We're talking about a forgotten era where the downtown wasn't just a place to go buy things. It was the absolute center of gravity for daily life. Families lived in neighborhoods right close to the center of town. You walked to the local store and you actually knew the name of the person ringing up your groceries. Schools, churches, and shops were all deeply intertwined. It wasn't about navigating endless, isolating freeways just to get from point A to point B. It was all about deep, physical neighborhood connections.
All right, shifting gears a bit for Section 4, the golden age of travel, when the journey was the adventure. Long before digital maps optimized every single second of our commutes, the towns along Route 66 developed entirely around the pure romance of the open road. Places like Cuba, Missouri and Santa Rosa, New Mexico sprung up specifically to cater to the tired, excited traveler, and they still preserve this magical roadside character today. Imagine actually being in the driver's seat of a classic car, cruising into Santa Rosa at dusk. The warm glow of vintage neon motel signs cuts right through the twilight, and the iconic architecture of classic roadside diners promises a warm slice of pie and a good cup of coffee. The highway itself breathed life into these communities, transforming them into vital waypoints for millions of Americans seeking adventure across the country. Just a small community surrounded by an enormous landscape. Picture pulling into Ely, Nevada, and feeling the sheer weight of those words. Ely's history is tied incredibly closely to the old mining booms and the rapid expansion of the railroads. But today, driving through it gives you this strange, totally wonderful feeling of isolation. Modern America, with all its frantic pacing, seems completely out of reach out there. There's no endless traffic, no suffocating smog, no towering glass skyscrapers blocking out the sun. There are just wide, open streets surrounded by the vastness of the high desert, alongside classic roadside businesses that have weathered the decades. Thousands. That is how many miles of open, completely untamed country once stretched ahead of travelers on these classic routes. Think about what that kind of freedom actually felt like. There were absolutely no GPS directions dictating your every turn, calculating your exact arrival time down to the minute. There were no smartphone cameras meticulously documenting every single moment for an online audience, and there were definitely no streaming services waiting for you in the car to distract you from the view right outside your window. You had a paper map, a full tank of gas, and the horizon. Getting lost wasn't an inconvenience back then, it was part of the thrill. The small towns you stumbled upon were the defining chapters of the entire adventure. And that leads us to our final stop, Section 5, Finding the Real America. You don't need a time machine. Because here's the thing, these incredible locations across the country, they aren't perfect, sterile replicas of the 1950s, and they certainly aren't frozen in time like untouchable museum exhibits. They are living, breathing pieces of America. Older architecture, legacy transportation, historic roads, and deep-rooted community traditions have miraculously survived right alongside all the conveniences of modern life. Nostalgia here isn't just about wishing you lived in the past. It's about appreciating exactly how the past enriches our modern landscape today. The 1950s might be gone, but the spirit of that America is still entirely visible if you just know how to look for it. Sometimes you find it in the worn counter of a classic diner, sometimes in the gentle hum of an old neon sign, and sometimes in a small town where you can drive for miles and miles without seeing a single skyscraper. You seriously don't need a time machine to find the 1950s. You just need to know which quiet, forgotten American roads to explore next. The real America, the one built on community, slow travel, and charming main streets, is still out there. It's hiding in plain sight, just a few miles off the nearest interstate. So, the only question left is, where will your next drive take you?